Hello, how are you doing? I'm feeling much better than I was in my previous video. Thanks for everyone that sent their good wishes. It is great to feel like myself again, and I have a big pile of new books that I'm really looking forward to reading, and I'm looking forward to reading at a pace again. I mean, I was still reading when I was sick, but at a much slower rate than I usually do. So these are all new books that have just been published in April that publishers have kindly sent me. And I want to start off by talking about some reprints of classic books. First off, there's a couple of books that have been reprinted by Everyman's Library, and they just do these like beautiful editions. And the first is Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. And this is a novel that was first published in 1980 in the West, because it was first published within the Soviet Union in the 1960s, but the KGB seized it and destroyed copies of it, so it was very controversial at the time. And it's known as the kind of War and Peace of Soviet Russia because it records that period of time. This novel begins with the Battle of Stalingrad during World War II and carries on from there, following the lives and fates of a Russian family. And so this is meant to be like a tremendous novel. Like a lot of people say, it's one of the best novels that they've ever read. And so I've always meant to get to it. And Vasily Grossman was actually born in Ukraine to a Jewish family, and but the Ukraine became part of Soviet Russia, and so he's writing very much out of his own experience of living in Soviet Russia. And because of recent events, it seems like very topical and pointed to read about the formation of what has become modern day Russia at the moment. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to finally reading this classic novel. It is quite long and extensive, but yeah, it's meant to be absolutely tremendous, and has I love how the Everyman's Library editions have extensive introductions, which I always read after reading the novel, but also chronologies of the author's life, so you can understand the timeline of his life and the very dramatic events that led to this novel being finally published and becoming available. So his novel Stalingrad was actually published for the first time in English a couple of years ago, and I've had this on my shelf since that was published. And this is actually the prequel to Life and Fate, though he wrote it first, but it was only published more recently in English. And I think it follows the same family that's covered in Life and Fate. So if you want a big, long, epic read about the formation of modern day Russia, or through the mid 20th century, this would be a really great project to do. Everyman's Library has also published a new edition of Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, which was first published in 1926, and this was his very first novel. I've read a couple of short books by Hemingway, but not a lot of his work. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to read his first novel, which got a lot of acclaim. It's about a group of Americans in Europe in post-World War I Europe, and following their lives, especially that of a journalist and his love affairs and his struggles. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading some more Hemingway. Then I have some new reprints of William Golding novels, and this is his Sea trilogy, or I think the trilogy is also called To the Ends of the Earth. So it begins with Rites of Passage, which this first book actually won the Booker Prize, and it follows the journey of warship, an ancient warship, traveling from England to Australia and carrying passengers that are emigrating to Australia. And so it's following their very dramatic and epic and tumultuous journey. And this actually comes with a new introduction by E. Annie Proulx. Yeah, that's quite exciting. Faber have been reprinting a number of William Golding novels, and all with new introductions by really prominent and interesting authors. So then there's also the second book, Close Quarters, which comes with a new introduction by Helen Castor. And then there's Fire Down Below, the third book in the trilogy, which comes with a new introduction by Kate Moss, who is an author, but also, if you didn't know, she is the founder of the Women's Prize. So yeah, I think this will be a really great trilogy to dive into. And William Golding obviously had a very strong connection with the sea and wrote about it quite a lot. It's going to break my heart a little bit showing this next book because I've not read it yet. I've read the first 50 pages of Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest. But I was supposed to see Douglas Stuart discuss this book last night in London, but I'm still testing positive for COVID, even though I'm feeling totally fine now, and even though all restrictions have been lifted in England, it's the advice that you should stay at home or keep your distance from people, and it seems like the sensible and responsible thing to stay at home. So yeah, I missed hearing him speak about this. So yeah, there's such a shame. And so I loved Shuggie Bain, and I'm just so looking forward to reading more of this. It's about two working class young men in Glasgow. One is Catholic, one is Protestant, and the relationship they find across sectarian lines. And I'm just so looking forward to diving into it and finishing this book. I love this cover by which is a photo by Wolfgang Tillmans, and I just think it makes an incredible statement, and I'm so happy to finally have a copy, even if I didn't get it signed by Douglas Stuart last night. And I also wanted to bring along my copy of Shuggie Bain because I wasn't able to get that signed because lockdown was happening when the Booker was happening, but I did get to actually meet Douglas Stuart a few months ago at a literary salon, so that was a wonderful thing. I feel very lucky to have been able to do that, but yeah, I so wanted to hear him discuss this new novel. Speaking of new gay literature, a new book of poems I want to read is Sugar Water by Beau Cohen, and this is a collection which explores the lives of dangerous lovers and surviving sexual assaults and reclaiming one's sensuality and the inheritance of trauma. It's been praised by the poet Richard Scott, whose collection Soho I absolutely loved. And he says that these poems are bold, off-kilter, and surreal examinations of queer life and desire. Another book of poetry that I want to read is Song for Almeyda and Song for Aninho by Gayl Jones, and I loved this author's novel Palmares, which was published last year, and it was one of my favorite books that I read last year. And this follows the lives of Almeyda and Aninho, who were survivors of a Portuguese attack on their utopian community, and they're separated from each other. And this occurs in Palmares, and but you follow their separate stories as they think they've lost each other for good. And so these are two epic poems told from their point of view, talking about their lovers, their lost lovers. And so I'm so curious to see how she wrote about these characters outside the narrative of Palmares. I have some new novels by Irish authors that I'm really looking forward to reading. I always love following modern Irish fiction. So first off, there's Seven Steeples by Sara, Baume, which is about a couple that completely cut themselves off from their friends and family to go live in the remote Irish countryside for 7 years. And so it's about their experiences and very much about our modern and recent times. I read Sara Baume's novels. Her first novel, Spill, Simmer, Wither, Falter, was that the name of it? I always get the order of those words wrong. But also her novel, A Line Made by Walking. I think they're just excellent novels, and so really looking forward to reading more of her fiction. Then there is the debut novel, None of This Is Serious by Prasifka, who was born in 1996. And this novel is about a young woman that is named Sophie that is just finishing with university and is struggling to manage online life versus real life, and how it feels like in real life she's being overshadowed by her best friend and is having romantic difficulties and finds herself online all the time, just endlessly scrolling and refreshing, hoping that something new and good comes up. Then there is a new novel by Denton called All Along the Echo, which is about a radio show host and his producer going on a road journey across Ireland as a publicity stunt in order to give this car away. But as their journey continues, it becomes an increasingly surreal journey, and there's a siren going by. And so I read this author's debut novel called The Early King and the Kid in Yellow. I think that's what it was called. It was really fascinating, very different novel. It was a kind of dystopian novel, but not like one that I've ever read before. And he has really fascinating writing style, so I'm so excited to read this new novel by him. Another author whose previous fiction I've enjoyed is Adam Scovell, and his new novel Nettles is about a boy who in 2001 is being ruthlessly bullied at school, including being whipped with nettles, which is why there's that title. And so it follows his journey in trauma, but then 20 years later he journeys back to this place to try to reconcile what happened to him in this place. So yeah, it's sort of dealing with that experience, that traumatic experience. And yeah, his fiction has a lot of psychological insight to it, and yeah, he has quite a unique point of view. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this new book. The Return of Faraz Ali by Aamina, Ahmad, and this is about a man that was born and raised in the red light district in Pakistan, but when he was still young, he was taken away by his father to give him a chance at a respectable life, and he's hidden his origins since then. But in his adult life, he's sent back to this red light district on a mission by his father to cover up a shameful secret, and there he has to reconcile with the past that is left behind. I've heard really great things about this novel from a number of authors, including Yad Yassi, who says it is a rich and deeply moving novel about confronting histories, both personal and political. Marvelous. Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow, and this is a novel about 3 generations of women living in Tennessee, and has quite an interesting structure to it, in that it begins in, you can see from the table of contents the time period of it. So it begins in the 1990s and follows these different women, the different generations of these women, but then it goes back to much earlier times before then going into later times in the 2000s. And this was written in after Trump was elected into office in America. So even though it takes place much before that, it was written very much as a response to our modern times. And yeah, I've just heard really great things about this book. Bolla by Pajtim Statovci. This is set in Kosovo in 1995 and is about a young Albanian man who's newly married and trying to finish his studies, but one day he meets a Serb who he forms a relationship with, and then it changes his life. So I had heard from a couple of people that were really scandalized that this wasn't on the current International Booker Prize long list, but I'm not entirely sure if it was eligible, because it was published by Faber at the very beginning of April, and I think that was past the eligibility date. But I'm really curious to read this, because this has been praised by a number of authors, including Emer McBride and Tori Peters and Natasha Brown. Tori Peters, who says this is devastating in the most beautiful beautiful ways. From the first pages, you realize that you are in the hands of an absolute artist. Then I have a new collection of short stories by Kate Folk called Out There, and these are stories which are meant to be darkly comic, and some of them are more horror, some of them are more sci-fi, some of them are kind of absurd. The author Shane Rawley says of this book, "One could fancy Kate Folk as the literary love child of Kafka and Camus and Bradbury, if Kafka and Camus and Bradbury were penning episodes of Black Mirror, but that still wouldn't capture the blazing originality and exhilarating weirdness of her writing." So I think that sounds so intriguing. I think the title story called Out There is about some fictional men within a dating app that are trying to steal women's data. So yeah, this sounds so intriguing. Pod by Laline Paull, and this is a novel told from the point of view of a dolphin, who is very much part of a collective, but is also an individual, which sounds quite twee on the surface. But I read this author's previous novel, The Bees, which is told from the point of view of a bee and showing the society of a hive, but in like such an original way, and in how this like society is organized, of this different species organizes their own society, and the bees is absolutely savage in some parts, and so it's really fascinating to read about, and so I'm quite curious to see what she makes about the lives of dolphins. The Fake Up by Justin Myers, and I don't often read that many like modern rom-coms, but this sounds like an intriguing premise. And I've been keen to try reading this author before. So it's about a couple that is pretended that they've broken up with each other, and all of their friends and family are thrilled that they had broken up with each other, but they're still secretly together and still secretly seeing each other. So it's about like the comedy of that process, but about modern relationships in general. There's a new essay collection which includes pieces by a fascinating range of authors. It's called This Woman's Work, and it's edited by Kim Gordon and Sinead Gleason, and so it's meant as kind of a counterpoint to how in music there's been a kind of tradition that music is made by men for men, but these essays are discussing women's roles in music, and so it's by authors including essays by authors including Anne Enright and Yi-Yun Lee and Margot Jefferson and Otessa Moshfegh. So I'm really keen to read about their reflections on this. I mean, some of them, they're talking about specific musicians, some of them are talking about music in general or their own encounters and making music themselves. I think Otessa Moshfegh writes about how she started singing and how she saw that as her main form of communication at first before she began writing. So yeah, sounds really interesting. And finally, I have a bit of a curiosity, which is a new edition of The German Ideology by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which was a unfinished book that they had written trying to describe their theories of the materialist method and their visions of a communist society. And so this is like an edited down version of a manuscript that still survived, which is edited by a professor of philosophy who makes some commentary on the surviving pieces from this. So yeah, I think it'll be like a sort of interesting insight into their theories and their philosophy, but yeah, as a kind of oddity and an oddball that I just wanted to sort of throw in at the end. So those are all the new books that I have that I want to talk about at the moment, but I'd love to know, if you've read any of these and if you have any thoughts about them, or if you're interested in reading any of these now, please let me know about that in the comments below, and I hope you're staying well and healthy and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.